Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Joon Ha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, June 11. It's a little bit after 3 p.m. And today started off with big economic news, corporate news, really, about this company that many of us order our goods from every day. It's Coupang.
Yeah, it's a little company called Coupang. But anyways, so South Korea will be fining the Coupang company 625 billion won. So that totals to about $409 million.
Now, the reason for that fine is, of course, it comes from last year's entire leak of information, client and customer information and their orders and everything. The government has been talking about investigations and calling in the Coupang CEO into the National Assembly for grilling. And so this is the latest result of this, right?
Right. So the PIPC, the Personal Information Protection Commission, they said that the New York listed company will be facing these fines for the reasons that you mentioned. But of course, there has been a lot of talk, as we mentioned in previous podcasts, where Republican U.S. lawmakers have had a little bit of an issue with South Korea's or the South Korean administration's handling of the Coupang issue, seeing that it's not a South Korean company, but a U.S. company in form.
As ever, you are the master of understatement, having a bit of an issue. It's a bit of an issue. We've not only had Republican lawmakers, we've had the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer. He's been hammering South Korea about discriminating against what you just described as a New York-listed company. Now, of course, South Koreans in everyday day-to-day life might treat Coupang as a Korean company. It's mostly does its business in Korea and is mostly staffed by Koreans. But yeah, it is an American company. And so it's not just going to be shareholders. It's also going to be, as you just pointed out, Republican lawmakers, the Trump administration officials. They're not going to take this down lying down.
Right. It's the largest ever fine that's recorded in ever imposed by the regulator on a single company. And they also have levied an additional 201.1 billion won fine for the unauthorized collection of records of online user activities and other violations. So that's a +1. So what's the sort of implications where this takes us now?
Well, the way that I look at it right now, the way that the South Korean government has been handling the whole Coupang case, the legal mechanisms have always been there. Now, of course, Coupang disputes the government's findings, and I assume that Coupang will take this to court. But regardless of what both sides are saying, the government and Coupang, the government has the legal recourse, as is clearly shown, to impose this kind of fine on the company. But that's the legal recourse. Does the government have the political recourse, the political bandwidth to be able to really push through with this? Because, as we just pointed out, not just Coupang, but Washington is going to come down and say, hey, South Korea, we don't like what you're doing. And we've seen repeated instances of when Washington will come down on South Korea saying, we don't like this regulation, we don't like that regulation. And the South Korean government says, well, what are we going to do now? And they hunker down and they discuss things and just let things die out into oblivion. So will this be the sort of thing that we might see going forward regarding this huge fine? I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, we have the ambassador or the new ambassador to ROC from the United States, Michelle Steele, who said during her confirmation hearing when she was not even provoked for that question on her take that South Korea is doing a bit of a harsh job on American companies. She didn't name Coupang in name. But do you see her entrance into Seoul as a trajectory for the U.S. voices against the South Korean administration for these actions?
I believe so. Michelle Steele comes from a very robust Republican background. And so she's very much aligned with a lot of Republican lawmakers who have financial backers, let's put it that way, who have vested interests in a lot of companies who are invested in Coupang. So for Michelle Steele to not say anything about this, for her to not push back, I find that extremely hard to believe.
What does it mean for other American listed companies or other international companies who are looking to reside and find business here?
Well, for a lot of those businesses, especially if they're Americans, this is something that we've alluded to in the past, as well as mentioned in some of our executive briefings, that for American businesses, their safest bet is to call up Uncle Sam and say, hey, we are facing this kind of problem as it is, and so could you back us up? Now, I forget who it was, but an American official not too long ago also included Starbucks into their list of complaints. Now, let's keep in mind that Starbucks Korea is not at all owned by Starbucks International. Right. It's still the majority owned by a Korean company, but the fact that it has the name Starbucks seems to have at least some American officials still believe that Starbucks Korea is also an American business. So these kinds of complaints are going to keep on growing. Oh, and by the way, no one's talking about Starbucks anymore these days.
Right. Since the Shinsegae chairman's apology, it does look like a little bit of the fire has died down, but there's still a bit of unresolved tension between the administration, the ruling party, and Starbucks Korea.
But the reason why I mentioned that no one's talking about Starbucks these days is because of what happened with the NEC, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Right. So the NEC...
the National Election Commission.
Nice segue, by the way. The NEC is in tatters at the moment. It does look like it is still very much reckoning with the crisis that happened with the ballot shortages. That happened on the afternoon of June 3rd, when voters who were looking to vote for their constituencies were faced with the fact that there weren't enough ballots to accommodate them.
Now, regarding this whole protest that we've been seeing, I think I already said this last week, but it bears repeating. I find these protests a little silly because, yes, there were multiple jurisdictions where they had these ballot shortages, but a lot of these jurisdictions happen to take place in conservative areas, especially in Seoul. And when they were complaining on that day of election, on election day itself, saying that this is a rigged election or whatever, I understood where they were coming from, but Mayor Oh-seon won anyway. So they won, but they're still complaining about it. Now, I get it. The narrative has changed. Now they're talking about distrust in the NEC in general, distrust in the institutions. But that being said, the people themselves, the protesters, they're still the same conservative crowd, aren't they?
Well, I think it's a little more nuanced. Since the protests that we saw in Songpa and Jamsil, just in the aftermath of the June 3rd election, just on June 4th, when protesters were blocking these ballot boxes from being from actually going out of the Jamsil, I think it was the 7th district, where they were blocking right in front. And then police had to get involved. But now that's sort of segued into a much more larger movement right outside of the Jamsil Sports Complex, which is where quite a plethora and a very nuanced crowd of individuals and also groups are coming together. Some from universities, some ordinary folks, some from the so-called far-right groups that we see, YouTubers, some of the loud voices, Joon Ha, the former history lecturer turned
pro-Yoon advocate.
Right.
Yeah.
Han Gyo-an, the former prime minister turned election fraud supporter.
Who's been talking about election fraud since 2016.
Right. And all of these other voices just basically compile together into the same mixing pot. And that's what I think is just quite an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing coming out in Jamsil at the moment. We're seeing ordinary university students saying that, okay, we have a distrust for the NEC, and we want the NEC or the government to actually talk about, look, NEC, you guys messed up. You guys need to fix it. But since you guys are a constitutional institution, you guys are an independent institution, you need to sort yourselves out. We can't actually enforce it on you because that's a breach of the Constitution.
But we've already seen that sort of thing happening already. The NEC chairman, he resigned. The Supreme Court accepted his resignation. The president, the Democratic Party, the People Power Party, they're all calling for investigations, and they are under investigation from the police and the prosecutors. What else do people really want to see happen for them to say, okay, we see that you're taking us seriously, and now we're going to stop protesting so much and let you guys take care of business?
Right, so that's the million-dollar question. The protests in Jamsil, they have gone quite out of hand. We saw a couple of reports the other day where I think it was a JTBC, a local broadcaster reporter, was being attacked by some of these protesters on the ground.
Which makes me feel very sympathetic toward them, by the way.
Absolutely. And also we had, I think it was the national team handball players who, very young players, most of them underage, where supporters, very fervent supporters were, or not supporters, protesters were asking them to open up their bags just in case they had quote unquote ballot boxes or ballot papers.
Which they are counting as evidence now.
Right, and they even told them to take off their socks as well, which is something, as you mentioned as well, doesn't really abide by sort of the normal human traits that we see from protests.
Again, the master of understatement.
Thank you for that assessment. Moving on, so the leaders of South Korea and the European Union, they met in Brussels just yesterday in local time. They issued a joint statement. They adopted it. It sort of went through 36 points, if I'm not mistaken. It was the last time that they had a adoption of a joint statement since their last summit in May of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So what did they agree upon? They devoted quite a number of sections to North Korea, Korean Peninsula peace. They called for peace in the Taiwan Strait and the Middle East. And they also had agreements for cooperation across trade, tourism, energy, technology, AI, and the sort.
What I'm going to say about the summit that we saw in Brussels was that it was two things. It was substantial and it was boring. It's the kind of bilateral agreement that used to define countries and blocs' relationships with each other before the age of Donald Trump, and I sorely missed it. And it's back as far as at least Europe is concerned, and I was enjoying the crap out of the whole thing. Okay, but regarding the agreements, there were so many different agreements, and I'm sure that if we start to go into all of the details, it would bore the listeners, it would bore me. And so, yeah, instead of the details of the agreements themselves, I think it's important to actually point out the overall narrative of this agreement, of these agreements, rather. And what the narrative change that I saw is just how much Europe has changed. Now, when it comes to South Korea, it's a given for any observer to have really ever paid even a bit of attention to South Korea to come to the conclusion that South Korea is a very shall we say, transactional / mercantile / national interest based country regarding in any of its negotiations. But if we look at Europe, for decades, Europe was this technocratic trade bloc that really focused on regulations, on trade liberalization. But now, increasingly, Europe is sounding a lot like South Korea. They're talking about economic security. They're talking about like-mindedness, whatever that phrase means now. And so this is what I'm seeing about this change in South Korean and European relations. But beyond these kinds of trade agreements, what we actually saw was also an increase in security cooperation. And although this wasn't one of the agreements that was reached, we saw this name come up repeatedly. It was called the Security of Information Agreement.
Right.
What is that?
Right. So the Security of Information Agreement, it effectively allows Seoul and Brussels to securely share classified information, pursuing industrial and research cooperation, which the Blue House also explained as going to bolster the two countries' relations in defense industry cooperation and also industry cooperation. So they agreed upon, President Lee, President Costa, and von der Leyen, they said yesterday they agreed to produce a new security initiative or start the negotiations for that initiative. As you mentioned, the Security of Information Agreement. They are expecting to establish a legal framework in subsequent talks between the EU and ROC officials. So we'll have to see how that actually goes into a trajectory. There was no mention of military information. It was just information.
So it's not going to be like the Jisomiya with Japan.
Well, we still have to find out, but what has been mentioned so far, it's just a SOIA, so SOIA instead of Jisomiya, SOMIA.
So let's say that the negotiations for this SOIA is able to progress. What exactly kinds of information are they sharing? Are they sharing agreements about defense procurement? Are they sharing about strategic plans of what kinds of weapons platforms to build? What exactly is this?
Well, that's what was still unclear. So the three leaders, they didn't really describe the details of what this security information would entail.
Well, it doesn't exist yet, so of course they can't.
Exactly. So, but it does look like it does underpin the ROC EU. I think it was a security and defense partnership that was signed, I think November 2024. They agreed on maritime cooperation, cybersecurity, defense industry initiatives, so joint crisis management. So all the like that would entail, vis-a-vis this security information.
But we can't be naive about this. Sure, this SOIA is something that both South Korea and the EU are going to continue discussing. But at the same time, it would not be an exaggeration to say that there are European voices that are concerned about South Korea's expanding defense capabilities. French President Emmanuel Macron was one of those people. He has been one of those most publicly known individuals who have been saying that Europe should buy European. And so there's that. And also we have to talk about steel. We saw the spate of agreements that was signed. But we have to remember that before President Lee Jae Myung arrived in Brussels, the trade minister, Joon Ha, was already there since June 4th. And the reason why he was there to lobby for South Korea's steel sector, because the Europeans have this new steel regulation that will raise tariffs on foreign imports of steel, as well as reduced quantities of steel that they are going to import from other countries. And so despite all of these agreements, we cannot be naive and just pretend that these kinds of disagreements will just disappear overnight. They are still going to be around.
Right. The EU is a collection of nations. It's not just represented by von der Leyen and Costa. So we'll have to see the trajectory on how it actually forms.
But shifting our attention to more domestic news, South Korea now has a new prime minister nominee.
Right. So Han Sung-suk, the SMEs minister, she was named by President Lee Jae Myung. She's, I believe, the second female prime minister nominee to ever. Yeah, ever. I think it was since Han Myung-suk, quite similar names, under the Do Mu-hyun administration, being the last female prime minister and the only female prime minister in constitutional history. It does look like quite a pragmatic decision by the Lee administration, forming, he stated in his January address, his New Year's address, that he will focus on, bludgeoning South Korea's economy, improving it, focusing on an AI-focused framework for the future. And I think that Han's background as Naver CEO, also head of the SMEs, puts her in a quite good position to lead that.
Oh, yeah. The whole AI thing just was one of those things that really caught my attention. Like you just pointed out, she's a former CEO of Naver. But it's not just about those big companies, right? Sure, there's Naver, but for Naver to exist, there has to be smaller companies that are able to provide the kinds of inputs that Naver needs. And so with her background, yeah, I thought this was a great nominee. But we have to talk about the current prime minister, Kim Min-seok. What's he up to?
Right, so the current prime minister, he made a social media post literally, and I think it was 2 hours after the nomination was announced, that he would be going back to the DP, where he would, he didn't say it explicitly, but he did hint at a bid for the DP leadership against the current leadership, who is facing a bit of reckoning for losing Seoul.
I like how you're being very careful about how he's just suggesting that he's trying to get a leadership role. This is the worst kept secret. He's been very chummy with Song Young-gil, the former DP leader, and the current DP leader Chung Chang-lek. He's been gnashing his teeth the whole time. They are going to be looking at a big head-to-head fight coming August, aren't they?
Right. So the August 17 DP National Convention, it will decide on a new DP leader, but also a full leadership committee. So this full Supreme Council will be voted in again. It does look like a lot of Kim Min-seok loyalists within the party, a lot of loyalists that view him as the successor to Lee Jae Myung, are siding behind him. So it's going to be a pretty interesting battle of characters for the DP leadership in August.
I really like the snide comment that Chung Chang-lek made. He was saying that the people are eternal, but administrations are short. He's also firing shots at the Blue House right now.
Well, he doesn't seem to like the shots being fired at him. So I guess it's looking, back and forth. So we have that to look forward to. And Han Sung-suk's confirmation hearing, the schedule has not been announced yet, but it does look like the nomination process within Parliament will begin quite shortly.
And unlike other ministerial posts, the prime minister needs to be confirmed by the National Assembly.
Right, so it does need to go through a plenary vote, as we saw under Kim Min-seok. We saw the PPP actually boycotting Kim Min-seok's vote due to Kim Min-seok's positioning towards the PPP and on other issues.
A whole lot of good that did.
Right. So it does look like a quite easy stride for Han Sung-suk. Of course, there will be some accusations against her alleged real estate properties that will come up during the confirmation hearing process, but none as expected thus far to actually obstruct her from taking up the premiership. Week ahead, President Lee Jae Myung's Europe trip will continue on to June 18th, I believe. I believe he will conclude his trip with attending the G7 summit in Evian in France, where he will be meeting with a plethora of nations. The G7 nations, also the plus alpha nations that will be present. I believe that he is currently in Italy right now. He's set to meet with the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and then meet with the Pope before attending. I think he will be attending a church service as well.
A peace mass, I believe it's called.
Right, that will be led by one of the cardinals, where he will also be delivering a speech on regional peace. So we have that to look forward to in the week ahead.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inboxes by 2 p.m. on Monday via the Week Ahead newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Joon Ha Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.